Thanks for coming onto the show. Really appreciate it.
No problem.
Can you start by telling us a little bit about your backstory, about why you became an MP in the first place?
That's a good question. It was never something which was on my radar. It really wasn't. It wasn't something which I'd ever aspired to be. Always extremely distrustful of politicians, if I'm honest. Certainly where we come from in Liverpool, and some of the battles that we'd had locally. So it was nothing which, as I said, it was nothing which, if you would have asked me in 2010, would I become an MP, I would have laughed at you. When I'd just been made redundant from my printing job at the age of 40. We got locked out of our factory for 6 months, so we had an almighty industrial battle with the pernicious owners who were from Austria. Locked us all out of the factory. And at the age of 40, I'd been a printer since I was 16. So, you know, that was going to be my life, you know, another 15 years and then potentially look at retiring. That was the idea. And then at the age of 40, you're basically thrown onto the scrap heap because unfortunately the printing industry had sort of lost out to technology and jobs were going at a rate of knots. And I always remember going to the job centre in Liverpool and asking, you know, I'm thinking, you know, I'm qualified, I've been a printer for a long time, I had qualifications, and when I got there, they were basically absolutely, you know, they were useless, to be honest. All that experience just wasn't anything within the jobs market, and the job what he offered, with the greatest of respect, a hot dog salesman, was a Saturday morning in Croxteth Park, which I'm now the constituency MP for, selling hot dogs, and you're thinking, you know, you've got a mortgage, you've got a family, it's not good. Yeah. It's not good. So I ended up going on to the, like many people, onto the taxis. I have a couple of friends who were Hackney cab drivers, and he said, it'll keep your bills paid. So with the redundancy, I got a cab. And I can honestly say it's probably the best 2 years training I've had for politics, because you've got to add them into personal skills. You've got to be able to speak to people, especially when you've got a sense of direction like I have. I was appalling. I was an absolutely appalling cab driver, and I completely admit that. However, you learn to talk, you learn to have debates, you learn to have arguments, you learn to deal with people in all different manners. 4 o'clock in the morning in Liverpool can be challenging, especially when you get lost and you've got to ask them where do you want to go. So no, it was good. And then I went into the trade union movement after the battle what we had in 2010. I stayed in touch with Unite the Union, who were fantastic throughout that. Sharon Graham in particular was magnificent. And I ended up working as a trade union organiser then. And that was the greatest job I've ever done. Basically going into factories, empowering people, get involved in the trade union movements, you know, aspire to have better working conditions, better terms and conditions, and I absolutely adored that job. And then in 2017, 2015, obviously Corbyn comes along, and then suddenly I joined the Labour Party Miliband's, but then Corbyn takes it into a different direction with obviously the anti-austerity agenda. I could see what was happening in the city. We'd be absolutely torn apart by Tory austerity, and he's speaking the sort of language which I believed in. And I'll never forget going to the Adelphi Hotel when he come to Liverpool in 2015 at the hustings, and it was like anything I'd ever seen politically. You couldn't get into the hotel. There was people crawling through windows to see him. It was the most unbelievable atmosphere, and what he was saying and what he was talking just resonated completely with what we wanted. And I remember going back to Unite and saying to Dave Kelly, who started Fans Supporting Foodbanks with, I said, he's going to win. And he went, no. He said, Andy Burnham's going to win. He's got the popularity. I said, I've never seen anything like that. And then, so that sort of like, you know, we've seen what was happening with the Labour Party, and then 2017, I got asked to assist an aspiring MP, Tankardin, because it was in my community in Walton, what he wanted to be the MP for. And at first I said no. I was quite happy doing what I was doing, and then I ended up assisting him in 2017's general election, safer seat in country, so he wins. Yeah. And then he says to me, would you consider being my office manager? And again, it wasn't something which he aspired to be, but then I thought, well, where can I make the most difference? You know, for my community, for the city, you know, is that somewhere that could actually affect change? So I took the job with Dan, 2 years doing what we were doing, you know, and then 2019, Stephen Twigg stands down in West Derby and I get asked, would I consider standing for the MP? And I said no, it's not something I aspire to do. And then pressure come about from different quarters, trade union movements, leaders' office, my own community, and I stood, and that's how I become the MP.
So it's not even somewhere you particularly wanted to go, but you you ended up getting forced into it pretty much.
Well, yeah, pretty much, not forced, but pretty much. And then again, I went back to that question, well, you know, what impact could I have, you know, for my community? You know, if I took that job, I'm probably going to discuss some of the things that obviously shaped me. And then I thought, if I took that into Parliament, could I make a difference? Could I actually, you know, being a cab driver, you know, listening on the radio sometimes and screaming at the radio when you were, you know, what are you talking about, you know? And I'm thinking, well, you know, many a time I've sat and slaughtered politicians and said, what did he do? And well, then if that opportunity comes along for you to actually be that person, well, then take it and see if you can do better.
I was just going to say that the experiences that you had and the variety of jobs really feeds into this job that you're doing now as an MP, but also, you know, in recognising what issues are probably the most pressing to your constituents. So as a Liverpool MP, what are the most pressing issues for your people, and how are you looking to address them?
That's a really good question again. And you know, for me, it's cost of living, it's how people are living, it's poverty. You know, and I think we can see that. I was in London with Belderbill Addy yesterday, and we were walking around their constituency, and you know, very much like Liverpool, you can see how people are struggling. You can see the housing situation. So for me, it's, you know, political decisions are being made which have absolutely devastated, you know, my community in the last 14 years in Liverpool, West Derby, and then political decisions that were made have been catastrophic. And the situation where I see so many people now, 1 in 3 people in Liverpool at the moment are food insecure. We're going to the schools, speak to the teachers. You know, so many kids from my constituency will not get the opportunity to fulfill their full potential because of the poverty that they're living in, the housing that they're living in. They'll have shortened lives because of the health conditions that come from living in poverty. And let's remember, we're the 6th richest country in the world. It's 2024, and I'm speaking in them terms. That's what they've done to our country.
I mean, we'll get into food into it in a bit, but first of all, something that has been a pressing issue and resonated across the years is the Hillsborough disaster. You've worked hard for justice for the people affected by it. Can you tell us about the work that you've done and why it's so important to you?
Well, I was at Hillsborough at 16, so I think that shaped me entire life. It's why I think I'm sitting here speaking to you now. I think that sort of like injustice that gets lit up in your soul when you see what we've experienced and what we experienced as people that were there, survivors, families, the whole city. It shapes your very being. And you know, my dad was seriously injured. I lost friends. So you know, come away from that, and it was just a transformational experience. Even though potentially at the time you didn't realise it, but it did. It completely shaped my life. So then you get into this position in 2019, and there's been fantastic work done by other MPs, other politicians all over the years. You know, you mentioned, you know, Maria Eagle, Andy Burnham, Stevie Rotherham, you know, Derek Twigg was there as well. There's been an unbelievable effort to try and keep Hillsborough on the political agenda. But for me, coming into this in 2019, what was left, you know, we'd had the Hillsborough Independent Panel report, we got the truth, we got the inquests changed. So we got all that, people knew the truth, but then what were the legacies left? And the 2 legacies for me, from a Hillsborough perspective, are education. So the whole country knows about Hillsborough. But when we talk about Hillsborough, we talk about, say, cover-ups. You know, I'm sitting here with you in the CWU, and we've seen a post office scandal, which was absolute playbook Hillsborough cover-up. And then the education, and then the Hillsborough Law, which Andy laid down, and Steve in 2017, which is about rebalancing the scales of justice. And, you know, spoke to so many people, we'd seen how Hillsborough was so unfair. It was so unfair from a legal perspective, and that many lies and smears were told, and there was no accountability at all to Hillsborough, and no justice. We got the truth, but no justice. So for me, it was ensured that if I got in that position, that we'd make sure that no other community should ever go through what we went through. But they do.
Yeah.
And we've seen the contaminated blood scandal, we've seen the post office scandal, we've seen Grenfell, we're going to see the COVID inquiries. You know, you talk about the nuclear test veterans, you talk about Zane, truth about Zane. There's just cover up after cover up after cover up. So part of my job in Parliament is hopefully ensuring that we get legislation in place which makes sure that these grievous injustices just don't happen again.
Well, speaking of legislation, you just touched upon it, the Hillsborough Law. What exactly is that then?
So there's three key elements to it. You know, the first element is a duty of candour. So people, officials, public officials, in inquests or inquiries actually have to tell the truth. You know, because remarkably, if people listening to this now and watching it, you know, they think that they have to, but they don't. They don't. So take Hillsborough for example. We have police officers get up on the stand and lie. You know, we as health officials get up on the stand and lie about what they done or didn't do during Hillsborough. So that's a key element of it, and that public accountability. And you look at the post office scandal. You've got what's happening in Parliament now. There's so many officials involved in that who lied and contributed to the misery for decades of people. People took their own lives, like they did at Hillsborough. Lives were completely shaped by that injustice. You know, 30 years fighting for truth and justice takes it out of you, doesn't it? It takes your whole life away. So all them people, all them magnificent justice campaigners and all the campaigns I'm talking about, their whole lives were taken in this fight for justice, where if we had something which immediately give us the truth, and I go back to Duckenfield, who was the police commander in Hillsborough, if he'd have stood up that night and said, I made a catastrophic error in doing what I did, and admitted it, and admitted what he'd done wrong, well then all them lives would have been changed forever, because they would have had justice, we would have got truth, and then potentially they could have grieved the lost ones and then moved on with their lives. And I know that for the fact because I've got a great friend, Jenny Hicks, who lost her two daughters, and I do lots with Jenny, and Jenny's only starting to grieve now, and she's sure she'd happy with me saying that. So all them years of fighting, the fight obviously takes over, but now obviously it's come to an end. You know, the grieving process starts. So just imagine the impact that's took on all them people across all the different scandals which I'm talking about. That could all have been changed by Hillsborough Law.
So you're saying with the Post Office Horizon scandal, this could help with that as well in
Absolutely.
forcing executives to tell the
Tell
truth.
the truth.
But how exactly would it do that though? Is it?
Well, you'd have criminal sanctions. You know, if it came out that you hadn't told the truth, well then you should face full force of the law. You should go to jail. Nothing would have given me greater pleasure than seeing some of them police officers in jail for the lies what they told about Hillsborough and the pain and misery that they caused. Exactly the same what you've seen with the post office scandal, exactly the same what we're seeing with contaminated blood. You know, we had civil servants tell ministers like Andy Burnham lies about that. So I know Andy's called for that, and I think that's got to be the way. You've got to change the culture. And I said this to Alex Chalk, who was at the Home Secretary when we had a meeting about the government's response to Bishop Jones's report, which was just before Christmas. And he was talking about the change in culture. I said, you will not change the culture unless people understand that there's going to be a significant response if the telling lies. That's how I feel you change the culture, is make accountability at the heart of every public service, full accountability and transparency. If we don't get that, we carry on having the scandal after scandal. The cost, what it costs in human cost, but also from a taxpayer's point of view, hundreds and hundreds of millions of pounds in inquests, in compensation, in everything that gets paid out by the taxpayer. Hillsborough Law could stop that. It actually saved money. If that's what floats your boat, and it's not the morality of what people have faced, if it is about money, public purse, well then the Hillsborough Law ticks every single box.
But the government didn't support the Hillsborough Law when proposed. They said instead have a charter. But would a charter be enough?
No, toothless. It's got to have the accountability at the heart of it, and it's got to have sanctions if you break what we're talking about. So it's completely toothless. Look, we've got the manifesto, the Lib Dem manifesto's come out this week. They've said they're going to absolutely implement a full Hillsborough Law, which is fantastic. We're waiting on the Labour Party manifesto to come out tomorrow. Keir Starmer's promised on a number of occasions, both to family members from Hillsborough and also to ourselves, that that's going to be at the heart of the Labour Party manifesto. So we wait with bated breath to make sure that happens and it's in its entirety. Another key part of the Hillsborough Law is obviously the duty of candour, but also rebalancing the scales of justice. And I liken what happened to Hillsborough. You know, we had to crowdfund one barrister, or the families did, crowdfund the barrister when he was taking on the full force of the law. So the police, all up services, they had unlimited public funds to get the best barristers, lawyers, the whole shebang in against the Hillsborough families. We had to crowdfund one barrister. How's that fair? And I liken it to going into a boxing ring with Tyson Fury blindfolded and with your hands tied behind your back, because that's what it was like. That was what the fight for justice was like. How can it be in a civilised society where you've got to have that fight for justice? It's not right, and it's not fair. And a key part of Hillsborough, a key part of that at Hillsborough Law is rebalancing them scales of justice, a parity of arms, which is the right way to do it. And again, that had changed the culture. That had changed the culture, because they knew that the people who they who lied about, smeared about, created this injustice around, they had the ability to get the same legal. Well, then that would make a massive difference as well.
So what happens from here then? You know, in pushing for a Hillsborough Law, what's the next step?
Well, as I said, you know, we're hoping tomorrow it's in the Labour Party manifesto. It's in the Lib Dem manifesto. The government fudged on it. The Tory manifesto wasn't nowhere near strong enough. We've got full support from the SNP, I think, as well. So now it's a case of waiting to see our manifesto tomorrow, and then the first 100 days in government, if the polls are correct and we are in government, with then a massive push then to make sure that it's in that legislation, which we hope it will be.
Gotcha. All right, appreciate it. Before we go on, I just want to show the viewers something. This is a graph from The Guardian this week showing the rise of food parcels distributed by food banks in the UK since 2010, the year the Tories took power as part of the coalition government. As you can see, they barely existed in 2010, and now more than 3 million food parcels were distributed in the last year. You've been pushing for right to food to be enshrined in law. What is the right to food, and how has the campaign progressed over the years then?
Well, right to food is something which I stood on in 2019 on that fantastic manifesto, which was transformational. I was proud to stand on that manifesto in 2019, and the idea behind the right to food was within this. I got into Parliament, and how do we keep it on the political agenda? Because I could see how important it was to our community and across the country that the scourge of hunger needed tackling politically, and how we do that. So we built a campaign, and it came on the back of meeting Henry Dimbleby. I was on the Environmental, Food and Rural Affairs Committee, and Dimbleby had been commissioned by Michael Gove to do a state of the nation around food, a food strategy, a national food strategy. So Dimbleby come before us in 2020, and we had a conversation. We were asking him questions, and I asked him about the right to food, and he said, well, I don't believe it's needed. And I said, well, I couldn't disagree more with you. I think we need something enshrined in law, which makes it absolutely imperative that people can live in a dignified manner, and elements of a right to food are universal free school meals. So basically Dimbleby went away and said, well, you create a campaign, you bring back to me, I'll listen to the people, basically is what he said. I'll listen to the people. So we said, well, it's a challenge, okay, Andy. So we went away, and what we then did was formulate 5 asks. We'd gone across the country during COVID asking what a right to food means to people, so it wasn't an obscure abstract, you know, from a university. What does it mean? What would the right to food mean on the school gates? And universal free school meals was fundamentally one of them. Benefits, which includes universal credit, pay also when a government passes how much a benefit to be. it had to come before Parliament and give us accountability on how would it ensure that somebody receiving that benefit lives in a dignified manner, can afford to put a meal on the table, because quite clearly wasn't the case. 219, we've seen, as your graph shows, from 210 to 219 when we started the campaign. We've seen more food banks than McDonald's. It wasn't paying. So that was basically the idea, and what we did then was we got a council motion. I was still a council at the time. We put it to Liverpool to declare cities and towns right to food cities and towns. So we've done that, and it just caught fire. 27, 28 cities and towns signed up to a right to food. Just last year, Belfast and Derry signed up to a right to food, and it's just created this huge culture of activism from so many different quarters, from school children to trade unions. The right to food was passed right to the trade union movement, TUC Congress. We got it passed at Labour Party conference in 2019, 2020, unanimously. And the idea basically is to enshrine in law these elements, what I'm talking about. Brazil have done it. So why can't the UK do it? And seeing what we're seeing, that was what we felt was needed. It needed no more stick and plasters, no more of the stuff that we were doing around with Fans Supporting Foodbanks, which we might touch on, which was fantastic, and there's unbelievable people in this country doing so much. But you look at the graph what you've shown, and I done an interview this morning showing how many food banks were across the country, and basically it's been created since 2010 in austerity, like a shadow welfare state run by donations and people to keep people afloat. So it's abhorrent. It can't carry on, and you can see the misery it's caused. As I said, you can see the health inequalities that it causes, and it's worth saying on here that we run with Fans Supporting Foodbanks 6 food pantries across the city. We've actually opened one on Friday, 7, and 60% of the people who utilise them food pantries that we do are in work. They're in work. We've had post office workers there. When you were on strike, we've had post office workers there. We've had nurses. So we've had professional people who you think would never ever need to utilise a food bank going into them realms. The self-employed, people who are on 0-hour contracts. So there's a huge issue in this country as well with regards how the whole wiring of employment is working for people. That needs fundamentally changing the nature of employment in this country, and we can see it with what we do. So that's what the right to food is. It's about community kitchens, it's about accountability, it's about making sure we've got things in place which can tackle what we're seeing, because as I said, what we're seeing now, your graph shows you, it's completely unacceptable. And I go back to it, it's the 6th richest country in the world. It's unacceptable, and it's all down to political decisions. It's all down to that place where I work making decisions which impact the people in our communities.
Well, there's a lot of fantastic work being done. As you say, it shouldn't have to be the case anyway, where donations are relied upon. But going back before 2019 to 2015, you actually started up Fans Supporting Foodbanks. So can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, it was me and Dave Kelly were both working for the union, both trade union organisers, and we'd done stuff beforehand together on football with regards to cheaper ticket prices. Working class supporters getting priced out the game, and we had a fantastic victory nationally with the 20s Plenty campaign, which £30 price cap on tickets, which I always remember the Premier League absolutely appalled by. One of the chairmen said it was socialism in action, it can't be allowed to happen, but it did, and it still carries to this day. It saved lots of money for the away supporters. But that's sort of like we seen that we done that together collectively, Liverpool and Everton, because I'm a Liverpoolian, Dave's an Evertonian, working with the fan groups. And then we were, and I'll never forget it, we were going into a community centre in Anfield, and we were meeting the lead organiser in the centre, a lovely woman called Ros. And Ros brought us in, and there was a big queue outside. And I knew a couple of people in there because I'm from that area. That's where I live now. I grew up in Anfield. And I thought, shamefully, I thought it it was a queue for the bingo. I'll never forget, I said to Roz, it's going to be busy here this afternoon with the bingo. She went, that's the food bank here. So I thought, hang on, I'm from this area. Why am I only sort of like seeing this now? And we went in. She said, "Come in the back." And obviously, it's a poor area, and it run on donations from the local people. And she took us in the back, and they had this big bag of pasta, something that'll never leave me, and put it into little sweet bags and put them in little bags for the people. And it was pitiful. It was shameful that people who you knew were actually queuing up to get that. So I went home that night. I couldn't sleep. Genuinely just tossing and turning and thinking, bloody hell. How have I not seen this in my own community, and what are we doing about it on the ground and politically? So I spoke to Dave, and I thought we'll start something at Anfield with donations from the supporters, and then try and obviously replenish the food bank shelves. And we had the conversation, Dave, so what about doing both? Obviously Liverpool and Everton are in close proximity, we'd worked together before, let's send a message of solidarity out. We had that conversation. So the next week, me, Dave and Robbie Daniels, who's the other Evertonian element of this, went to Goodison, and we got more chip wrappers than we did donations, and we had no social media presence, but we got a few donations, and we just thought there was a gem of an idea there, and it grew. We built it up with the football clubs, but it's always about solidarity. It was always them trade union values imbued into Fans Supporting Foodbanks, collectivism, coming together. And we got to, I understand when people had a go at us for doing it, because they thought we shouldn't be doing it. It's the government. The governments of the day we shouldn't have food banks, and I get all that, totally get it, and we shouldn't in a society where you have a government that cares. But Dave Kelly harks back to obviously the miners' dispute, and it was solidarity, not charity, and we felt as though we had to keep people afloat. I'd seen them people, they were seared into my mind, the people who knew, who were getting these bags of pasta, so we thought we'll do something, but always running parallel to what we created with Fans Supporting Foodbanks was obviously the need for political change. And then obviously the journey I go on, I end up in Parliament, and that's why the right to food's the key political element of this. But Fans Supporting Foodbanks has grown unbelievably, and we've got Scotland, we've got Northern Ireland, and but also what it's done, and it's very important, is make working class people understand who the real enemy are. And it's not somebody in a different kit with a different accent. It's the people that are actually causing you to collect food, to donate to your communities, and it's sharpening people politically and make them understand, that. And I think it's so important in these times as well. It's so easy to demonise elements of society, and football fans do that to different reasons. So collectively bringing clubs together, and we've had Rangers and Celtic collecting together, unknown, in Glasgow. 2 brave supporters came together and done that. Dundee United, Millwall, Chelsea, City United, Liverpool, Everton, and it's just, that was the ethos of it. When Liverpool supporters go away to a different place, we take food to Newcastle, so it was working class communities donating to them, and you're building up this sense of solidarity. And and I think in this country, divisions between the major cities, utilising football, is used by various agencies to keep people divided, and there's nothing they like more doing than dividing the working class, because the working class come together, extremely powerful movements, and we've always thought we could achieve that through football. But as I said, it's some Fans Supporting Foodbanks is something we're extremely proud of. It's something which continues to grow internationally. We're having conversations with other clubs as well in Germany, different places, who want to look at the model that we've done and create that community element. And it's, to finish, I'd probably give people a different perception of what supporters can do. What away supporters can do, and watch some of the horrific stuff on telly at the moment, with demonising football supporters, and they can be a massive force for good as well. And if you harness that, well then, you've got something to really to behold. And the CWU have been magnificent in supporting everything that we've done with Fans Supporting Foodbanks, because they've seen a value in it.
You talked about something that you saw, the pasta being taken, and divvied up into sweet bags. Are there any stories that you've heard from people that have relied on, you know, food banks and those services that have just really kept with you?
Yeah, I mean, we had a... So we've the food pantry, what we've done in West Derby on the Friday, we had a nurse come, a district nurse in full uniform, and you're thinking she'd just come off shift. She'd been working, I think she'd been working nights, and she was at the food pantry 11 o'clock. And she had 2 kids, she'd just been recently divorced, you know, things had happened in her life. But the full uniform, and it was just so powerful that she'd been helping people that evening. She'd been helping other families in their own circumstances, and obviously everything around what was happening in their life. And I think that really moved me, because, you know, you come in from where I'm born in the 70s, and it's a much demonised era, but when you look at it in the round, you know, my dad was in and out of work, you know, because Thatcher's deindustrialisation of Liverpool. You know, he was a car, you know, he made cars, he shut down Leylands, he's in and out of work, but we never used a food bank. We had a council house. There was always food on the table. There was always a meal on the table. So that era, you know, much demonised. And then, you know, fast forward and see a nurse who's having a difficult time, and she's utilising the food pantries. And there's so many stories about how people have just fell on difficult times, and it's so easy. During COVID, you had people who've been, you know, worked at contractors, you know, really well paid people who've done really well in their lives. Suddenly, the whole net taken away from them, and there was no safety net for them. So they're utilising pantries, and you've just got, you know, you go to West Derby, you see so many different people, and across the city we see so many different people in different circumstances, but the underlying key element to this is the welfare net has just been torn apart. And basically, if circumstances happen where, you know, they say you're only a monthly paycheck away from utilising a food bank, well, it can happen like that. It can happen to someone who never expected for 1 minute. And I think that's some of the stories. What you see is how people who never thought they'd be in that position are in there. And what we try and do with the food pantries that we run, it's, you know, it's like a market. It destigmatises. It encourages people to come together, and always bear in mind, and politicians should always bear this in mind, that you are one paycheck away from that. As it stands now, anybody can be in them circumstances, you know. And I think that's one of the disappointments from that era of COVID, when you thought there's a sea change here. You know, people are thinking that this could happen to anyone. So all that benefits the nonsense, all that demonisation of people, you know, the feckless poor. I thought that'd go. We thought that'd be gone. You thought you'd move on to a different era where there was more public awareness, and it's back again. It's back again. The demonisation of the poor, the demonisation of the disabled. You know, how many people who aren't working. You know, and I think politicians need to sometimes take a long, hard think about how easy it is to fall into them predicaments.
And just touching upon what you said earlier about, yeah, these food banks, these pantries, you know, these schemes do help, but they're not actually solving anything. And so, to fix the root cause, what do you think needs to be done, and what can people do to also help in aiding that? Well,
I think obviously, no, we'd say an element of that, a key element of that solution is a right to food, enshrining in legislation and practice is what we talk about, but also empowering the trade union movement. You know, it's key, fundamentally key, to ensure that people actually go into jobs where they've got some security, they've got wages which actually keep them afloat, keep them living in dignity. And the way the job market's gone, the way the economy is, got inequality and unfairness hardwired into it at the moment. It's so slanted, and that's why you hope, you know, if we do get a Labour government, we might touch on that in a minute, that, you know, the new deal for workers, even though, you know, it's been watered down and there's much discontent, it's beginning to change the balance of power, because it's far too much now, one way. I mean, the amount of people that we get who are on 0-hour contracts who've got to use the pantry because 1 week they're okay, next week they haven't got the money to feed the families or pay the rent. How can you live like that? You know, you've got no stability. You've got no ability to plan for your future, your children's future. You've got no ability to look forward. And, you know, how can that be right in a fair and equitable society? So for me, they're the two elements. What you really need is, you know, what I am going to say right to food. We need that fairness enshrined in legislation. So political decisions have got to be transparent and we can challenge them. But also we need to talk about how the economy works with people, because at the moment it just isn't.
Yeah. And also a little bit of a cultural change too, because as you say, you know, there is a bit of a demonisation there.
Oh, absolutely,
so
yeah.
people need to perhaps look at things slightly differently.
But that's mainly driven by politicians, you know, and obviously to the right-wing media. You know, you'd like to, you know, I think, you know, we've done a study, we had a 2-year study done on from John Moore University on our food pantries, and, you know, a fantastic academic called Jack Sugden and his team spent 2 years working on the pantry model, what we created, and they brought a fantastic report before us, and it was about how people perceived the pantries and who used them, and, you know, it was about like camaraderie, it was about solidarity, it was about feeling part of something. So the demonisation comes from people who don't use them, who aren't in them positions, and unfortunately that demonisation's been driven through this Tory government from Osborne. You know, and the Labour Party were guilty of this as well. It's been a political, a political undercurrent. That demonisation of people who need the welfare state. There's nothing wrong with having a fully functional welfare state, and if you've got to tap into it, well then, why shouldn't you tap into it? Yeah. You know, I think that tone, narrative, I actually put an early day motion down about language around poverty with an academic from Liverpool University, and we Dr. Rachel Brody's fantastic on this, and it is about the whole narrative, how you talk about poverty, and I think it's a subject which we do need to think long and hard about, because something which never left me was, I was a counsellor in Everton, and the food bank used to be next to my council surgery, so we used to have the surgery and you'd have like a traditional style food bank, and you get people coming in who had obviously difficulties, all sorts of troubles. They utilised the food bank. By the time they got to me, they were just beaten. They wanted help, but they were absolutely defeated. They were on their knees. And it's always struck me, you know, we can't allow that to happen, because that could happen to anyone. And instead of putting your foot on someone's head and pushing it deeper under the water, which this government's done, you need to put an hand out and lift them out the bleeding water, and that's what we should be aspiring to do, and that's my politics.
Well, for our viewers out there who do actually want to try and make a difference and get involved with Fans Supporting Foodbanks, how can they get involved?
Well, get involved by seeing if your club's got a Fans Supporting Foodbanks model. If they haven't, have a look at doing it. It's really simple. You just go up, you rock up match days, you collect food, and then you give it to your potential nearest food bank, food pantry, and it's just about that collectivism on a local level. All food that you collect goes into your local food banks. That's what we've always done. You know, we've got Fans Supporting Foodbanks. St Helens rugby supporters do it brilliantly well. So it's football, rugby, can be done in any sport. You know, and we're collecting at a music event in Liverpool. And Matt Tuesdays, we're asking people who are attending that, you know, to donate. So it's just that solidarity element, you know. Basically, Fans Supporting Foodbanks was, and everything. It's a fight back against Thatcherism. It's a fight back against there's no such thing as society. It's a fight back against that I'm all right, Jack, and the others can go. You know, and I think that's what we try to fight back against. So if anybody wants to get involved, you can drop a DM to Fans Supporting Foodbanks Twitter. Dave will pick it up, and we've spoken to lots of different clubs, lots of different people. We'll speak and show you what we've done. We're no experts by no means, but we've got a model which works.
Thanks. Let's move on to the main spotlight of the show, or what's going on over the next month or so. Obviously, the general election going on. One of the things that, you know, one of the big questions rather, is that there are a lot of people out there who voted Tory back in 2019. And so as a Labour MP and the Labour Party yourselves, you'll probably be looking to win back a lot of those voters. How can that be done?
Well, I think they're doing it for us. To be honest, I think you've seen the absolute capitulation of the Conservative Party. I think over the last, Johnson seems a lifetime ago, doesn't it? Johnson 2019. You know what they've done politically to get rid of him, to bring Truss in. then she does what she does, catastrophically to the country. Then Sunak comes in, and I think they've just shown themselves to be inept, out of touch, and then people who lent the vote, the red wall seats, lent it to Johnson. Really, I think, for all his ills and for all how useless he was as a prime minister, he was a campaigner.
Oh, so you think it was more for him?
I think it was more for Johnson, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I genuinely think it was more because of the personality he was and what he was portraying, and I still think he was the one who said he can make Brexit work. And I think, for me, a lot of them people lent him and that vision of Brexit the vote, which was remarkable, really, in politics, because you had seats going that would never, ever go. You never thought in a million years you'd have seats in the northeast, mining towns, going conservative. I think he had a big role to play in that. And obviously, let's not, 2019, Corbyn had been completely demonised then. He wasn't getting the opportunity to break through with any political argument. He was seen as the establishment wanted rid of him, so all guns were fired on Corbyn and his project. So I think that opened the space then for Johnson to come through, and a Conservative Party. And I think a lot of them voters now are looking at, obviously, the state of the Conservative Party now. And also, let's not beat around the bush how awful Brexit's been. Absolutely appalling for this country. And, I sit on select committees, the Environmental, Food and Rural Affairs, and so many sectors across industry are just breaking down at the impact Brexit had on this country and what it's done to us economically, culturally, and I think politically as well. So I think now there's a bit of a realignment now where people are realising, they've had 14 years, they've had austerity, and I think that there's an opportunity now maybe for a fresh start. And I think Labour Party's strapline change. I think people are ready for change, and that's what I'm getting back on the doorsteps is that, I think there comes a time and it's run out of energy, it's run out, and obviously, the mess Sunak's made of the campaign so far has been, it's been something to behold, hasn't it? It really has. No, we haven't had to do anything really, except just not make massive mistakes and let them do what they're doing, implode amongst themselves.
It's interesting that you mentioned personality, especially with, Boris Johnson and, people going for that. Arguably as well, there's another personality that's, come out and is standing in Clacton in Nigel Farage. With him and the Reform Party, what exactly do you think they would want to gain out of this election? What are they trying to do?
It's a good question. I'm terrified, to be honest. I think the media have got so much responsibility for giving Farage the platform, what he's had over the years. How many times has he been on Question Time? It's not compared to something like the Green Party where you could have put alternative views across. I think he's been mainstreamed into public discourse, and I think his views are abhorrent, truly abhorrent. But unfortunately, there's people in the country, like we've seen with Brexit, who'll listen to what he's got to say, and the age-old demonisation of certain sectors of society. You think it can't carry on. You're thinking it can't work again. How many times does it carry on working? But it does. For someone like Farage, and he's an unbelievable. He's an operator. He knows how to do what he does, and I wouldn't take that away from him. He's he's probably one of the most influential politicians of the last 2 decades, undoubtedly, and he hasn't even been in Parliament. But I'm really fearful. I'm really fearful of what comes next. And I look at Le Pen in France, you look at what happens in Germany, you look at what's happened in Holland, you look at that rise of that far right, hard right narrative, and everything that I've talked about for the last 20-30 minutes about, trying to build collectivism, understand, bringing working class communities together, know your real enemy is. Well, he does that, but he does it in a totally different fashion. And he makes people think who the enemy is, which suits his agenda and narrative. And I think it's really, really worrying politically because God knows what the Tories are going to come back like. You know, we'll see what the scale of the defeat is if they do get defeated, like the polls are saying. If he wins in Clacton, and then there's a Tory party which is in complete disarray, where are they going to jump? Which way are they going to go? You know, you look at some of the Tories that have got ousted under Johnson, who were more like the old style Conservatives. There's not many of them left on them benches really, and it'll be interesting to see how they reformulate. But I think it's usually important for the country how they come back. Yeah. You know, because whatever happens after this in this election, what's the next election? You know, what are we going to be facing? And are we going to be facing something which is a nationalist hard right party? And they'll be unbelievably bankrolled, you would have thought, by various agencies. And then, you know, the elephant in the room is probably what happens in November as well if Trump comes back. It's worrying times. It's worrying times for the world, isn't it?
Well, let's focusing on Labour, because obviously you're saying that, you know, the Tories are shooting themselves in the foot, but Labour themselves have a few criticisms of their own. You know, for instance, Keir Starmer's taken the party in a very different direction to what it was in like 2017, 2019 under Corbyn. There's also as well a criticism in regards to, you know, the cohesion within the party as well, in regards to his politics. Personality wise as well, arguably he's not as strong a personality as what Boris Johnson was. And so do you think that this is something that could still carry Labour through to victory, and can they pull themselves together a little bit if they do come into government?
It's a good question, you know, and I think what they'd say is, obviously the people around Keir Starmer and the strategists in the party, they'll say, if you look at the polls, you look at how the voting's going to be disseminated, if the majority that's expected, or certainly from the polling, they'll say that they've done what they need to do. I'd counter that with, I think there's a need and an ability potentially to have a radical government as well. I think what I've talked about in the circumstances what we find ourselves in, I don't think we can tinker around the edges when you've got millions and millions of people in poverty. So, you know, from a strategy point of view, 4th of July, we get over the line within governments. Well then, if we have gained power for the first time in 14 years, what are we going to do with it? And that's key. And that's where, obviously, then we all wait and we all see, and certainly from my perspective as a member of the Parliamentary Labour Party, and somebody, you know, who's an MP for Liverpool, and seeing how austerity's affected my city and my community and the people I serve, well then, I'll be extremely vocal in coming forward to say, well, what are we going to do to ensure them changes actually make massively transformational differences to people's lives, because you can't carry on how we are. You just can't carry on how we are. So it'll be hopefully, radicalism will come because they'll have to. And I said this morning when I was speaking to somebody, the graph what you showed before, that doesn't change on July the 5th. Yeah. Them problems are there. You know, these systemic failings what we've got within the economy, the systemic failings we've got within the welfare state, the NHS, you know, these are going to need, we can't just like not do anything to fix them. Because we'll have to fix them, because as you say, in 5 years time we need at least 10 years to fix what these have done to us. Well then, we've got to make sure that people in 5 years time, if we are in government, say, well, they have made a difference to my life, they have made a difference to society. The Labour Party have done what they were set up to do, which is to transform society for the working class.
So why would you say then that it would take them getting into government before they do implement anything that is a bit more radical? Because at the moment, you could argue for some people, yeah, the staunch Labour supporters, they'll vote them no matter what. But for some, it's just about getting the Tories out. Is that mindset enough? Will it be enough to take them into government and then also help them be accountable once they're in government to give more and make more changes?
Well, that's the $1 million question, isn't it? You know, I think the strategy what the party have embarked on, we'll see if it takes us to power. At the moment, the polls are in the right way. But once we get in power, obviously then we've got the mess which we're going to inherit. We've got a world which the mess that it's in, and we're going to inherit. The political circumstances that so many different places find themselves in. and we've got all that coming down. It's all going to be in the inch day, so I don't think it'll be a place for the timid. And I think I always go back to it again. Hunger's a political choice. Well, we're going to then have our hands on the levers to make them political choices, and it's up to people to ensure the Labour Party acts in a way which them political choices, the transformation for people's lives, because people's lives depend on it.
Now, you've been a supporter of the CWU for a while. You talked about your trade union background, so that's not surprising. What can Labour deliver for our members?
That's a good question. I keep saying that. I think obviously the New Deal. I know Davey Ward's been instrumental in bringing that together with other trade unions, and there's a bit of disquiet because the 2021 what Andy MacDonald created has been rolled back on, but it's a case of getting that in, and then obviously we can campaign for that to be strengthened. And it's about what I said before, it's about rebalancing the scales, because the inequality is hardwired into employment at this moment. From a CWU perspective, obviously we've got the whole issue around who's going to own the Royal Mail. One of the in 2019 I stood in the manifesto about renationalisation. I'm a massive believer in renationalisation. Industries that are key to the country's infrastructure. Post office, Royal Mail's one of them. We see the mast that's been made of water, so I think all these things are going to come to a head where there's so much damage being wrought over the last 40 years that the pieces have got to be put back together by our party. So from a CWU perspective, we'll have to see what happens with the Royal Mail and how that's going to unfold, because what we can't allow is some company, some owner to come up, cherry pick it and destroy it, like we've seen so many other companies being destroyed. And the Royal Mail is one of the jewels in the crown of this country.
So then, I'm guessing you're not a fan of the idea of Daniel Kretinsky coming in?
I'm not a fan of that at all, no. Absolutely not, no. We see now these people come in and asset strip national assets and walk away with their ill-gotten gains, and the taxpayer, we're left to pick the pieces up. We've got to look at these things as jewels within the crown of this country, and I think that's what we need to be doing. And I think there's got to be a political turnaround, because I was listening to Mick Lynch the other day, and I've always said it myself as well. Can anyone name any privatisation, any sector what it's worked in? Because I've asked this question on the doorstep when people have talked about nationalisation. Just give me an example of where it's actually worked for the country, for the taxpayer, and I haven't heard one yet. So these are the conversations that are going to have to take place once we hopefully get the levers of power.
And so with Dave Ward, when he came on last time, he was talking about negotiating and chatting with Daniel Kretinsky and trying to figure out a way for this to happen, because it seems like everything's pointing towards that direction. But he says also that he's going to want to work with the Labour Party if and when they do come in to help scrutinise that deal. So I'm not sure if you would be part of that process, but as an MP, what would you say would be key to look for when this deal is made?
I think it's going to be how economically it's delivered. How's it going to be paid for? What the terms and conditions are going to be? Is it just going to be a takeover to asset strip? Run down terms and conditions to the lowest denominator. And I think that's always a worry. When I've seen takeovers like this from a corporate perspective, and you've got firms which are once, the jewels of the crown. And a personal example is, my brother worked for British Gas. He loved his job. Then bang, fine and rehire. Oh. So he refused to sign the contract, and then he loses his job, like many others did then. And that sort of like destruction, he then, chief executive, then comes to make millions of pounds. He's bragging about how much he's made on the back of getting rid of all them people, all them lives transformed, all them skills lost. You look at P&O. So for me, it's about, if their owner, what's his strategy, what's his economic strategy, what's his end game, what does he want to do with, with the Post Office, Royal Mail? How do we ensure that he's got its long-term aims, and best interests of members, of people that work there. How's he going to grow it? Because all we've seen is, you know, it's the contraction of it. How can we grow it? Because I know the CWU got fantastic ideas about bringing back post offices that have gone, that have been shut down, and turning them into assets for the community. You know, if he got sort of that vision. If he hasn't, well then for me, he's not fit for purpose. We want somebody that's going to grow that. If it's not going to be nationalisation, if that's not at the moment not on the agenda, well, how are we going to ensure that you get an owner that actually grows Royal Mail and doesn't asset strip it and destroy it? Because unfortunately, with the previous regimes we've seen that, we've just seen the destruction of it, and I think it's really, really important that whoever comes next actually gets this, because it is, you know, it's something rightly we're proud of. You know, it's got a status, it's got symbolism to the country, and unfortunately I think this country's been far too quick to get rid of things that we should be proud of, and it always tickles me when you get this take back control. Well, we give everything away. You know, when you look at what we've done with water, when you look at what we've done with transport, with the rail system, the bus systems, you know, we privatised them all, lots owned by foreign countries who subsidise their own transport on the backs of what they pay through here. So it's rebalancing all that, and I think, you know, the Royal Mail's at the heart of that conversation as well. How are we going to ensure we bring it back to where it should be, because it was a fantastic asset for the country.
Now, I just want to show our viewers something, this video that you shared of Mick Lynch on Twitter last week.
We've never really had proper privatisation where we could actually have competition. Is that feasibly possible on a railway where you've only got one track?
Julia, was the rest of privatisation successful? You haven't got competition in water, it's collapsed. It used to be owned by the counties and the towns. We've had record price increases in electricity and gas. The private companies will do nothing unless they're subsidised. They're not investing capital. The electricity companies and the water companies have extracted billions for shareholder profit, and the systems are collapsing because they haven't invested. The train operating companies haven't invested a penny in the railway in 30 years. We've subsidised them the whole time while they've taken approximately £10 billion out of the system in profit. So the whole thing has been a disaster. Rail track collapsed under its own incompetence. That had to be taken back. The privatisation of London Underground through Metronet and tube lines collapsed. And that was a Labour privatisation, by the way, so I'm fair-handed. Ken Livingstone had to take that back, and it cost us billions. There is no privatisation that's been successful that I can see in terms of our key infrastructure services. We need a railway that's coherent, that's part of an integrated transport policy that includes bus, includes local services, even our ferry services with the P&O disaster that we've had. We've got services in the west of Scotland that need restructuring. So
hold on a minute. Ferry services in Scotland are in a mess because the SNP failed to actually get two ferries on order at a reasonable price.
Well, that's their incompetence, and they're accountable for that. The good thing is they are accountable. The fat cats in the train operating companies have not been accountable. They hide behind the minister. What's going to happen here is that we'll have an accountable chief executive or chairman of Great British Rail who we can point the finger at, both staff, passengers, taxpayers and the commentariat, and say, you are responsible.
I'm sure a lot of our viewers will probably relate to what Mick is saying there, and it touches upon some of the things that you were saying, and a call again for public ownership. What do you think about that? And as well, you've talked about renationalisation as well. Is that something that is realistic in this current moment, or is this something that we'd have to build in the long term?
I mean, Mick speaks with such clarity, doesn't he? Such political clarity and factual as well. I think that's why they're terrified of getting him on there, because he always comes up with the goods, doesn't he, when he speaks about it. You've just seen, you know, absolute abject failure from a privatisation agenda. Everything that it touched has failed. You know, we've had to, you know, the taxpayers had to bail out the probation services, you know, when Grayling done that, you know, and the cataclysmic cost is remarkable, both in taxpayers' purse, but also to the country, you know, to the standing of the country, to the feeling of the country. So, you know, I feel as though what's going to happen, you look at what's going to happen with Thames Water, is that going to have to be de facto renationalised because it's going to completely fail because of what it's done regarding building up huge debts and making sure that shareholders actually get paid while people are swimming in sewage-infested waters. I just think that now there's an acknowledgement the public opinion is completely on the side of renationalisation. And you look at some of the stuff that we own to it, you know, politically, I think that's the way forward. And I think, you know, once we get into power, if we do get into power, people are not going to accept sewage in rivers, you know, the ability to just not going to accept what the Tories have done or what privatisation's done, and include the Labour Party in that as well, over the last 40 years. So I think there's a sea change in public opinion. I think people expect more now, and it's going to be an extremely interesting time politically, how that gets dealt with, and how we actually, again, rewire public services, because it cannot carry on as it is now. And, you know, we've got our own NHS on its knees now. So, you know, a huge part of that's got to be what we can do to ensure that the fat cats, the untransparent people that are in the shadows, siphoning monies out of most of the key infrastructure in this country, I think that's got to end, and I think people expect it to end as well.
Gotcha. Ian, thanks so much for coming onto the show.
So I'd just like to thank all the CWU members who've been fantastic in their support for me and what they've done. And also I'd love to give a shout out to Paul Chadwick and Brian Parsons, who've been magnificent. Parso on the Real Truth Legacy project, which is a Hillsborough education. So the CWU, Brian and the team have been magnificent in creating an adult version of that, which will go into trade unions, they're going to hopefully, you know, into different spheres from an adult perspective. And Shadi's just been immense on Fans Supporting Foodbanks and support me in my role as a MP in Liverpool West Derby, as of Brian. But so have a lot of CWU members. I've got some great friends in the CWU. So thanks very much for all your support, and it means a lot to me.
Thanks again, Ian. Really appreciate it. And that about does it for this week. Thank you so much for tuning into CWU Live. As always, we really appreciate you being here and supporting us. If there's something or someone you'd like to see on the show in the future, or perhaps you want to share your thoughts on things so far, please comment down below. We'll see you again after next week. And as always, stick with your union.